Okay. So this afternoon, we're having Yvonne Fong. So she is a data scientist at EO Data Science at Perth in Australia. So Yvonne is a data scientist at EO Data Science, and then she's helping clients to operationalize Google Earth Engine for the business and projects. She is passionate about leveraging satellite data to gain insights and drive positive environmental and social change. I had an opportunity to listen to, if you listen to podcasts, so by NGIS, and so I had a chance to listen to Yvonne in one of the podcasts, and also Nick Murray was there too, I think. Yeah, so it was really insightful, the work that Yvonne's doing. And I think it's geo, what's that called again? It's a large project, right? Like multiple projects by Google.
Yeah. It's the Group 1 of Observations Google Earth Engine program, which EO Data Science is supporting, and Nick Murray is a part of that. And yeah, if you're interested in the podcast, it's called Location Matters. You can find it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever. Yeah,
really cool. Okay, so this afternoon, Yvonne will be sharing with us her expertise in creating Google Earth Engine apps. And just to so this is something that we did earlier for the parallel talks. If you've maybe some of us may not have joined the parallel talks, but for the question and answer, so what we'll do is we'll have a Slido, and then what we'll do, because the format of the workshop is that Yvonne would be going through, slides and also the code editor, but feel free to, use Slido with this code, EarthEngine SG1, to send in your questions, or even during the here in Zoom, and then we can just read out the questions to Yvonne. Yeah, and then what else do we have in? So that's it. I think I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Yvonne.
Great, thanks, Don. All right, let me share my screen. Can everyone see that? Great. Yes. All right, thanks for the introduction, Don, and for inviting me to this event as well. Very excited to be here to walk you guys through Earth Engine apps. So before we start, I just want to make it clear, because we only have around an hour and a half, I am assuming that everyone has some level of familiarity with Earth Engine, JavaScript, working with satellite imagery. As much as I would like to, I unfortunately won't have time to dive too much into any of this. I want to try and make full use of our time to cover how to build an Earth Engine app. So now that we've got that out of the way, here's the agenda for today. I will be starting with an overview of Earth Engine apps, what goes into an app, and then we'll do a bit of a hands-on exercise. So why use Earth Engine apps? So if you were at the plenary talk earlier today, as Nick Clinton puts it, this is an avenue for you to show off what you've done. But basically, why you want to use an app, the major reasons come down to accessibility and usability. So to run an Earth Engine script, you need access to Earth Engine, whereas apps do away with this restriction immediately and allows for anyone to access the app through a browser, even if they don't have an Earth Engine account. This is particularly useful for researchers or analysts looking to share their results with the public or with relevant stakeholders that are not Earth Engine users themselves. You can share your analyses in a visual, interactive way that is easy for anyone to use. So with that said, apps evidently improve usability, with the main avenue for interacting with Earth Engine usually being through coding. So there is quite a steep learning curve there for someone who has not used Earth Engine before. An app facilitates user interactions and allows for code-free access to the EarthEngine environment to analyze and visualize data. The one disadvantage is that it is possible for others to view your EarthEngine code, not in a direct manner, but it is possible. So if, for example, you're concerned with someone being able to copy what you've done, then that is something to take into consideration when deciding to build an app. Now, I know we sent an email to everyone to have a look at some of the public apps before today. If you haven't, that's okay. We'll look at a few of them together. So this here is actually EarthEngine's public app gallery. So I'm just going to jump onto this link now. Yeah. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so over here, you can see if you click on Get Started over here, that actually brings you to the EarthEngine docs for building apps. This is where you can find information on how to build an app. There's some code snippets you can take, and there is a section with frequently asked questions as well. So now let's have a look at some of these apps. First one I'm going to look at is the Ocean Time Series Investigator. So if you click on that, it brings you here. And first thing you might notice is that what we usually see in code editor, where you actually type in your code, have the console and the docs, that is all gone. We are left with just a user interface. And so on the left here, we actually have a panel. And this panel is holding what's called widgets. I will talk a bit more about this later. But you can see anyone that's looking at this app can interact with it by clicking on a location. And when you do that, the let and long widget in the panel here, maybe I'll zoom in a bit to make sure everyone can see. Yeah, this let and long actually changes to the point you just clicked on, and a new chart is generated showing the time series at the point that you just clicked. It's taking a while to load, but yeah, one more thing with this app is it actually creates a new layer called click location. It's not showing up yet, but what this is it basically created a new layer on the map with a dot on where you've just clicked. Not sure why this is not loading, but feel free to explore this on your own device in your own time. What I want to show you guys as well is with this public apps, you can actually access the source code through these three dots in the top right-hand corner. So if you click on that, there is a view source code. And if you click on view source code, it brings you to code editor with all of the code that makes up the app. So if you click on run, you should see exactly what we saw earlier with the app over here. So this is actually a really good place to start if you want to build, say, an app with similar functions to one of the public apps. The source code for that app is a good place to start. You can adjust some of the functions in the code, some of the data, add a few things, remove a few things to get your own app with similar functions. Now I'm just going to go back to the gallery. And I want to look at the split panel app. If you click on that, it brings us here. And what we're looking at here is actually a flooding event in Myanmar during the 2018 monsoon season. So what they've done here with this app is create a split panel. And this is a really good way to visualize the same image at two different periods of time. So you can see on the left, we have before the flooding event, and on the right, after the flooding event. So there's lots of ways you can make apps. These are just a few possible options. And yeah, feel free to explore all of the other examples as well, and look at the source code and play around with it. Now I'm just gonna go back to my slides. All right, now let's dive into what makes up an app. So we've got the source code, widgets, panels and layouts, and styles. So to build an app, we need a script that's been developed in EarthEngine. Any script will do, and it doesn't actually require a user interface. You can have an app that just shows a map, for example. But if you want to allow the user to interact with your app, then it will require some kind of user interface. Be mindful that we are going to lose the console. So anything that is printed to the console will no longer be viewable. If there's an error in the script when you are viewing the app as well, it will fall over and stop processing at that point, but we won't have the console to give us feedback on what the error was. So I mentioned user interfaces earlier. To get the most of apps, we need some form of user interface, and in EarthEngine apps, these are constructed from widgets. So here are a few of the basic standard widgets, you could use to make up an app. So we've got a label. This is basically just a string that you can add to your panel. So in the Ocean Time Series app we saw earlier, they had a title and a little description that would have been the label widget that makes that up. Got a button that you can just use for users to click on it to get some kind of functionality. Got checkboxes to switch things on and off. Sliders to change the value of a continuous variable. And there is a specific type of slider for dates as well. The text box if you want someone to be able to input data, for example. UI.select is actually just a drop-down list. And then we've got chart objects like what we saw again in the Ocean Time Series app. And then we have, of course, the map and map layers. You can have multiple layers in your map view at the same time. Also important to remember is that widgets are client-side objects. So we populate them with client-side data, and we'll need to pass them back to server-side if we want to do any server-side analyses using the data that has been input by the user. We'll come back to that when we do our exercise. Now, panels and layouts. So a UI.panel is a container in which to hold and arrange your widgets. UI.map is, of course, your map panel. As we saw in the split panel map example, that would have contained two UI.maps, one on the left and one on the right. We will also need to introduce a special panel to hold all other panels in your EarthEngine user interface, and that's UI.root. So the UI.root is a fixed instance for everything in the code editor below the horizontal bar. By default, it contains just a single widget, which is the default map when you open up code editor. Now, layouts control how widgets in a panel are arranged for display. There are two options, flow layout or absolute layout. So flow layout displays widgets in a row or a column, depending on what you specify. The widgets are arranged according to the order in which they are added to the panel. And absolute layout, on the other hand, positions widgets according to specified positions in the panel. So unlike the flow layout, the position of a widget is determined by the position property of the widget style, not the order in which it is added to the panel. I mentioned style earlier. So we can use the style argument to improve the aesthetics of our widget, make it look pretty. So this includes things like setting object sizes, colors, font. There's lots of different parameters, and the exact parameters available for each widget do differ from widget to widget. So I'm just going to pause here and see if there's any questions up to this point.
Okay, so far no questions.
Okay, cool. All right, I'll
Alright.
carry on then.
Okay.
Yep, now that we know what goes into an app, let's build an app. So these are the steps I usually take when building an app. So before I dive into EarthEngine and do any coding, I like to envision what I want the app to look like. Sometimes I even just put pen to paper and do a rough sketch of the app. I just find that makes it easier to visualize where and how I want to place things before I go in and write the code to create the app. The next 3 steps, I will walk you through them in code editor. So if you are logged into EarthEngine and want to follow along and play around with the scripts, that's the link to the repository for today's workshop. If you just want to watch me do it, that is fine as well. It is completely up to you. So let me just share this link in the chat. I'm trying to find my Zoom app. Chat, there we go. Yep. So if you click on that, if you have an EarthEngine account, that should bring you to the repository. Let me know if anyone is having issues accessing it. Let me just double check that it's been shared. Yep. Cool. All right. So if you're there, I'm just going to start with this last script in the repository, which is the app's tasting menu. This was actually created by Michael David at Google. And if you click run on it, it's basically like a sampling platter, a tasting menu of all the different widgets and things you can do with the user interface functions. So there's a button called Click Me. And if you, sorry, I'll just zoom in a bit. Yeah, so pay attention to this text output. When I click on Click Me, it actually creates the word click on here. And there's a different button to reset it. I can click a few times to add more clicks. We've got sliders here. So this first slider is actually connected to the second slider. So the second one moves when you move the first one. Got check boxes, got a text box. You can type whatever you want. Over here, this is interesting. So we've actually got a linked map. So what that is they've created it so that when you move around on one map, the other map moves to the same view as well. And then we've got a split panel. We saw this earlier. And we've got a chart object. But yeah, this is, you can have a look at the code to see what makes up all of these different widgets, but I will not be going into detail for this one. What I will be doing is walk you through, as I mentioned earlier, the 3 steps: preparing our data, adding widgets and panels, and finally adding functionality. So if you click on the first script, preparing our data, actually before that, my first step was actually have a vision, wasn't it? So let me just show you the final app that we are trying to build here. So what we are doing is we want to create an app that lets users easily create an annual Sentinel-2 mosaic. So I've got a drop-down list here where they can select the year. Let me just zoom in again. I've got a little checkbox to activate the slider. And then you can filter for cloud cover with the slider. And when you click run, that should generate an annual Sentinel-2 mosaic. So before building the app, I sort of just had this all in my head, knowing that, this is what I want my app to look like. So now going back to the script, preparing our data. So here, I just wanted to, have a look at what I want displayed on the app when users interact with it. First thing I do here, of course, is import the Sentinel-2 image collection. And then I've defined the start date and end date. I've just used the start and end of 2020. And I've defined the percentage of cloud cover to filter by, and I've just set that as 20%. The reason I've put this into variables instead of directly putting them in here is because later on, this will be from the user input, and you'll be able to see when we move on to adding functionality why I've put them into variables instead of directly inputting them here. But finally, we want to create our mosaic. And to do that, I'm just going to filter for date using our start date and end date. And then filter for cloud cover with our variable called filter by. I'm just going to select the red, green, and blue bands to create an RGB image. And then I'm just going to use median to reduce it. You can use other reducers as well. So now I just want to have a look at what's been done here. I'm just centering the map on the location of interest and adding it to the map. I click run. Yep, we have our 2020 mosaic over, this is actually Perth in Western Australia. So this is what I want my app to be able to display. Now that we've prepared the data, let's go into the second script to add widgets and panels. So I've kept all of this at the start. I've just taken out the visualizing part of it. And now this is the fun part where we are adding panels and widgets to create our app. So first thing I'm doing here is to create our map panel, which is going to be where the image shows up, where the map shows up. And then I'll just add a title for our app. How I do that is using UI.label. So if I go into the docs and look at UI.label, you can see that the possible arguments here is value, which is what you want the text of the label to be. You can set styles, and you can also link to a URL. So we're not doing that here. So I've just set the value as create annual Sentinel-2 mosaic. That's the title of our app. And then I've set the style here. And I've included font size, color, font weight. You can also add other things like background color, font family. It's a lot of different types of styles that are possible. Now I'm going to add a second UI.label for some text just below the title to tell people how to use the app. So the text that's going here just says, select a year and cloud cover percentage, then click the run button to view the image. It's a pretty simple app with simple instructions. And I've just set font size and color for our text. Now I mentioned that we need a UI.panel to hold the widget. So that's what is being done here. I'm just creating a UI.panel called tool panel. And if we look at the arguments for this, you can give it a list of widgets to add to the panel, set a layout, and finally, you can also style the panel. So I've just added our title and description widgets to this panel, set the layout as flow. So if you remember, flow just means widgets get added to the panel in the order that you add them. And I've just set the style as with 30%. So you can see that no, I haven't gone through the rest of the script yet, but I just want to show this. So if I click run, you can see that the panel takes up 30% of the screen. If I didn't include that, by default, it takes up 50%, but I don't want that. The panel is not the main focus. I want the map to be bigger on our screen. And that's why I've added this 30% with style. Now we need to add the rest of the widgets to our panel. So first of all, I'm just going to create all of the widgets. And I'll start with our drop-down list. So that's our UI.select that creates a drop-down list. And you just, with the items, it takes an input of a list of items that you want to put in the drop-down. A placeholder, that's what it will show before the user selects any of this. And if I go to docs, UI.select. So if you don't indicate any placeholder, the default will just be select a value. Now, next thing, we're going to create our checkbox. So that's UI.checkbox. And I've just put a label next to it. So that's just the text next to the checkbox. And I've called it filter for clouds. And I've set the value as false. So what that means is that the checkbox starts out unchecked. Next, I have to create my slider. And that's using UI.slider. And here you can set the minimum and maximum values for your slider. So because this is percentage cloud cover, of course, the minimum is 0, maximum is 100. And what step means is when users scroll through the slider, I've just set the step as 10. So it's every 10%, but you can also set it to 5 if you want people to be able to choose, say 25%, 30%, 35%. Now this is an interesting style parameter as well. I've just set it to stretch horizontally. So let's say if I didn't include that, you can see that by default, the slider is just this very small thing, and it's not very friendly when you've got so many values to slide through. Another thing you can do instead of stretch is set the width. Say if you want it to be a specific width, say I want it to be 250 pixels. You can also set the width that way. Last thing, last widget that we are adding here is our button. So that's UI.button, and I'm just going to call it run. Now that we've got all our widgets created, we need to add it to the tool panel. And again, because we set the layout as flow, we just need to add these in the order that we want them to appear. And so I've got my tool panel. I just go .add and add our widgets one by one. Last thing here, to initialize the app. Again, I've centered the map on my location of interest. And yeah, I'm just going to clear the root panel, the default in EarthEngine with our the default map. So I'm clearing that and then adding the UI.split panel. What that does is this, so that you're able to adjust the panels left and right. And then I've just added our to panel and our map panel. So if you click on run, that's what you get. So now we've got a nice looking app, but it is not functional yet. So you can click on any of this, click run, nothing's going to happen because we haven't added any functions to our widgets. But that is the next thing we are going to do. Just going to pause here once again and check if there are any questions so far.
Maybe we can take a minute if anyone has questions for Yvonne. So far from what she's presented, you can type in your questions at the Slido link, yeah, before she continues with the functions.
Quick water break as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so the link again, so if you look at the chat box, so it's when you go to Slido, click the link and then type in EarthEngine SG1, and then it'll direct you to a browser in your browser, like a page where you can type in your questions. Questions, anyone? Anyone typing questions? Maybe not yet. All right. So if not, then yeah, maybe we can continue.
Right. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Don.
All right.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention as well, if you are interested in finding more about the types of styles you can apply to your widgets. If you go to the EarthEngine documentation and scroll down to widgets on the left panel, yeah, there is a section at the very end called styling widgets. And here you can click on the CSS reference that will bring you to this page. And that gives you a whole list of different styles that you could potentially or possibly add to your widgets. Noting that these are in these names are in the CSS format. So, but if you click here on JavaScript names, there's a neat little table that shows you what to call it in JavaScript, which is what we are using in EarthEngine. All right, now let's add some functions to our widgets. If you go back to the repository, we're just going to go to script number 3, which is add functionality. You might notice that my little script here on creating a mosaic has disappeared. I've just moved it further down, don't panic. But I'm just starting out with importing the data set, configuring the panels. This is all the same as before. Now, we're going to add some functionality to our widgets. So with the checkbox, remember my vision of how I wanted the checkbox to activate the slider. So I've just added this argument called onChange, and I've created a function called toggle slider. So right here is the function toggle slider. I'm just going to say that if the checkbox has a value. So if the checkbox is ticked, I'm going to go enable the slider. So set disabled is false. Else, if the checkbox has no value, then we're going to set the slider as disabled. So that's the function I've added to our checkbox. Now I've also added this additional argument in our slider so that it starts out disabled and it's only enabled when the checkbox is ticked. Now the most important function I've added is to create the mosaic when our user clicks on our run button. And that's where I have configured our data here. So remember I had our variables start date and end date. I've just adjusted it a little bit here to get the year of our date from our drop-down list. So the year is going to depend on whether the user selects 2018, 2019, or 2020. Once we get that, I'm just going to define start date. I do have to convert it back to an EarthEngine date object. And we're going to conjugate the year that the user input with the month and day, which I've indicated the start date as 1st of January. And the end date is the same year, but 31st of December. So doing something very similar with getting the value of the cloud filter percentage. I'm just getting the value from our slider depending on the cloud cover percentage defined by the user. Now this create mosaic is exactly the same as before, which is why right from the start, I've put this as start date, end date, and filter by. We've only slightly adjusted how the variables are defined. Now visualizing our image, here I've used ui.map.layer to add the layer to the UI map. And I've just made a slight adjustment to the name of the layer. So I've used, again, the year value that the user chose to name our layer. So if they chose 2018, I'm going to name the layer 2018 composite. Now I want to add this to a set layer. So I've set it as layer 0 every time so that a new layer overrides the old one. This is so if someone is using an app and they keep changing the year or adjusting the cloud filter and keep running it to get different images, we don't end up with the app having to load 10 different layers. It will always override the old layer. Now the rest of it is exactly the same. Center the map, replace the root, and add our tool panel and map panel to it. So if you run that, got a neat little app, and you can test it out by, I'm just going to select 2020. I want 30% cloud cover. Click run. Look. And there we go, the app works. So just to double check, I'm just going to choose a different year to see if we come up with a different image. The other thing as well, have a look at the layer name. It's come up with 2020 composite because that was the year I selected earlier. If I change it to 2018 and click run. Yeah, we've definitely got a different image. Now let's see the layer name. It's now called 2018 composite. And if I change the cloud filter to 90%, let's see what we get. Once again, a slightly different image. So our app is definitely working. So there is one last step now that you've got a working app, and that is to publish it so that anyone can view the app. So how you do that is by clicking on this apps button on the top right of your code editor. This is where you can also manage existing apps. I can delete this app that I've already created. But what we want to do now is create a new app. So if you click on new app on the top right, you can type in whatever name you like your app to be called. I'm just going to call it my Mosaic app. You do have to choose a cloud project to publish it to. And you can restrict access to a particular Google group if you don't want anyone from the public to be able to access it, only people that are within a Google group, for example, the stakeholders for your project. If you only want those people to be able to view the app, you can add them to a Google group and then restrict access to the app to that group. I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to publish it to the public. And you can choose whether you want to feature this app in your public apps gallery. So everyone has their own public gallery of apps available at your username.users.earthengine.app. So I will show this to you in a bit once I feature this app. If you choose to do this, you can select an image and write a description. This app Now you can choose where you want the source code to be from. So it can be the current contents that are in your code editor when you clicked on the add button, or you can get the source code from a specific script path. I'm going to do that. Once all the fields that need to be filled out have been filled out, the publish app will be enabled, and you can click on the button to complete publishing. One thing to note here, and they do have a little warning here as well, is that if there are any assets in your script that are assets from your cloud project or your own assets, you must make sure they are shared publicly or shared with the app so that people viewing the app can see those assets. If not, the script is going to fail because those assets cannot be found. If I click on publish, you can see here if you selected for it to be featured in your public apps gallery, there's a little eye here, just to let you know that this app is featured in your public apps gallery. And you can go to your gallery by clicking this, view gallery. So this is my gallery, which is yvonne.fong.users.earthengine.app. And you can see that my Mosaic app is featured here. It does take a few minutes to publish usually. Let me see if this has been published yet. No, it's not ready yet. That's okay. If you wait for a while, it should be published, but that is why I have also published one earlier, and which is what I started out with you guys with. This is my vision, and this is what we've created. So that was an error loading. Let's try that again. And you can see that the slider starts out disabled. And only if you click the checkbox for filter for clouds, then the slider becomes enabled, just as we define the function to be. And there we have it. So whatever you decide on when creating the app, say putting it in your public gallery or sharing it with a restricted group, all of that can be changed afterwards as well after publishing. Again, just by clicking on apps, you can manage all of your apps here. If you click on update app here, you can change any of these settings after publishing your app. So we've created here a very simple app for users to easily create a Sentinel to annual mosaic without having to do any coding or having to go into EarthEngine by themselves. Once the app has been published, you can share this link to the app with anyone and they would be able to just access it from their browser. Right. Were there any questions before I wrap up?
Okay. Any questions for Yvonne for what she showed about creating an app, functions? Okay, no questions so far. Yeah. Does anyone? Yeah, we can have a minute or two. Oh, okay, so now we have one question. So, after publishing an app, is there a way to track its analytics? Say how many visits, who is visiting, and from where, how many times it is shared? Yeah, I can
Unfortunately not. What you can do is if you publish a Google site, it's possible to embed the app in the Google site, and then you can track the analytics for that Google site.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Where can we find the embed?
Yeah, that is a very good question.
All right. But then that means there's definitely a way to embed the app, say on a different website, say on a blog, and then if that blog has say attached to a Google Analytics, then maybe that's the way to find the like where the users are, where they're not who, but where they're coming from, the traffic. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That'll be cool.
It is not so straightforward if you want to embed to say like a WordPress or Wix site, it's because you do need that Google authentication for the backend for the app to be able to run. So right now the only straightforward way of embedding an app is using a Google site. So I think Nick Murray has actually done that with his Intertidal app. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah. So what we're looking at here is actually a Google site that has an app embedded in it. So because whoever owns the Google site would have the should have the authentication to EarthEngine as well. That's how this app is running and working. But if you're using, say, WordPress or some other website host, it gets a bit more complicated.
Yeah. That is very helpful. Like there's still a way to share it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Any other questions for Yvonne? Yeah, I think the last question was really good. Like, because when Nick Clinton was saying about the apps, you want to show it off, or like you want to show people like how useful it is, or you want to get a sense of how the traffic, which parts of it maybe are getting used. So getting an idea of that basic analytics would be helpful, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, it'll be good. It'll be great if there were additional functions to track the analytics directly from an app, but I don't think it's quite possible yet now.
Yeah, that might be like one of the items on a wish list for Google.
Yes, that's a very long list there.
yeah. Right. Any more questions? Yeah, please don't be shy. Okay. Anyone typing a question?
Oh, my workshop is that comprehensive. No one has questions to ask.
But yeah, I guess as a reminder to the participants, so we have Yvonne's session recorded. So yeah, later on we will send another email to everyone who signed up, so that you can access the link. I think it will be in EarthEngine virtual meetup. This is Sabrina Seto's site, but then also I think with ISPRS SC's website, so it might be posted there too. So if you want to come back to the recording, then yeah. Okay, so we have one question. So it's can we generate an app for drone images? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. So if you have your drone images in a GeoTIFF format, you can import that into EarthEngine, and then use that as the data to build your app. Just make sure you remember to share the asset with public so that it works in the app.
Right. Yeah, it has to be public, especially if it's your own app from your own assets, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Very cool. Okay. Question: is there like a limit to, I don't know, like the number of apps that you can do, or the kind of, say if you have so many apps and then it's taking a lot of traffic? Yeah. Would you?
Not that I know of. I haven't created that many apps.
Yeah. All right.
But traffic wise, it's really, actually, let me just give me 1 sec to look this up. I remember seeing this somewhere.
Okay.
About having a lot of traffic to your app. Just give me 1 minute.
All right.
Right. So yeah, if your app becomes so popular that lots of users are using it at the same time to generate large volumes of data, they might actually get a quota exceeded error. The users will see a warning message, and EarthEngine may have to temporarily restrict access to the app. So I can't tell you what that quota is. That would be a question for Nick, probably, Nick Clinton.
Yeah.
But yeah, that could possibly happen.
All right. Okay, so there's another question. Is it possible in the future to make your app require a fee?
Right now, no, because EarthEngine is mainly for nonprofit and research use. They are, if you were at the plenary talk, Nick Clinton mentioned commercial partners getting interested, Unilever doing some work with EarthEngine. So they are starting to go down into the commercial path. So there may or may not be a future in apps being commercialized, but right now it's only for free use and not for commercial use.
All right. Yeah. All right. Okay. Questions? Additional questions?
Yeah, if not, I'll just wrap up with one final slide.
Yeah, all right.
So this was a very short workshop on EarthEngine apps. There are so many possibilities, so many things you can do with EarthEngine and with apps as well. So if you want to dive deeper into app building or want to learn about, say, machine learning in EarthEngine, my colleagues and I do run a couple of different courses that go more in-depth into these topics. If you are interested, you can jump onto our website. Sometimes there are dates listed for the courses which you can sign up for. If not, you can submit an expression of interest form through the website. And when there's enough interest, we will schedule a course and inform everyone that's on the list. And yeah, if there's any more questions, feel free. If not, that is all from me, and that's my email if anyone wants to reach out.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Last call for any questions for Yvonne before we end the session. Okay. Okay. So if not, yeah. Thank you so much, Yvonne. That was really helpful. Like I learned a lot too. Like I think what's important also, like if you're a student and you're doing research, like having a vision for like thinking about what you want the app to do. So having that vision first in your mind, as opposed to like, well, nothing wrong with playing around and just doing stuff, but having that vision first and a rough sketch in your mind and putting that, I think, is very helpful. So I think that's very good advice when building an app.
Definitely. Yeah. And this is a really good way to share your research with anyone really. One of my colleagues, he actually built an app for his thesis defense when he was doing his PhD, and used that to show his results. Yeah, so it's definitely a good way to share results with anyone, whether it's people that are already familiar with EarthEngine or people who have never used it before.
Right. Cool. All right. Yeah, I think that's it. So again, thank you, Yvonne, for your time and for sharing your expertise on using EarthEngine and for on building great apps. Yeah. So all right.
Thanks for having
thank you
me.
also, everyone. Yeah. I will look into the links that you sent on like from EO Data Science. I'd be interested to see those. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, that's it. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.